I'm finding a common pattern amongst books on this subject that I'm really not enjoying. Welcome, my mere mortalites, to another round of the book reviews. My name is Kyrin, and I do these book reviews for those who want to transcend beyond their own mere mortality, to gain some knowledge, something interesting, some deep perspectives from the books that they're reading. Today, it is a unusual one, but not too crazy from me. It's a subject I've explored many times in the past. It's on Buddhism, and this is called The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh. This book was published in 1998, and it's about 280 pages in length. It contains the ideas, philosophy, teachings, learnings, doctrines of the Buddha and of Buddhism as decided by Thich Nhat Hanh. Now, it's split up into 4 separate categories here. Part 1, the Four Noble Truths. Part 2, the Noble Eightfold Path. Part 3, other basic Buddhist teachings. And Part 4, discourses, with all of these having many numerous subchapters within. The type and style of writing is very reminiscent of other Buddhist books by people such as the Dalai Lama or other Buddhist monks. So usually it is translated from their original language. In this case, I believe it was Vietnamese. And also has this component of the spoken word of discourses. So the Buddhist teachings, for example, and you'll find many within this book, is that he is relating stories to his disciples about some aspect of Buddhism or some learning that he has gained from his own meditation practice and whatnot. Very similar, there are stories from Thich Nhat Hanh's life of his own disciples in Plum Village or these other places, which he then relates and I suppose expounds upon and really focuses in on one of the Buddha's teachings and then just really grows it out from there. So many of the chapters are related to small stories that he has and is expounding upon of, yes, this is why this teaching is important and you can see this use in this scenario. Touching upon the author, not only does Thich Nhat Hanh have a very cool name, he also has a very cool life. So he was born in 1926, so as of today, 2021, he is 95 years old. Mad props for living to that age, my friend. And also he has had a very turbulent life, I guess you'd say. So he was exiled from Vietnam around the era of the Vietnamese War, and he ended up settling in France and founding his own monastery called Plum Village. And he is an extensive writer, has many, many works, and has been in the forefront of something called engaged Buddhism, which is, I think it's sort of like reinterpreting the Buddhist ethics and moral codes and putting it more into an everyday situation, life in the modern world with technology and things like this. On to the main themes. I'm going to split this up roughly how it is in the book based on page count and also on the contents page. So the first 2 parts, which is the Buddha's teaching, the core doctrines of Buddhism. Now the first, I guess, is the Four Noble Truths. So what are these truths? I've written this down in roughly easy to understand language. So the first is there is suffering. So this is dukkha. So no matter what, you cannot argue that there is some sort of suffering in your life. You're always going to be wanting or desiring something more. There's always something more that you need from life. And this can be acute suffering. So, the pain of losing a loved one or something like this, or even just the general everyday suffering in life where it's like, oh man, I wish I had this little thing, or this could be better, that sort of thing. Almost self-consciousness. You're aware of yourself, you're aware of the future, and you're aware that bad things can happen, good things can happen as well, but there is suffering. So that is the first noble truth. The second is we create our suffering. So most of the suffering in our life is not from physical pain, from people hurting us. It's not from the environment really doing bad things to us, although that can happen. Most of it is suffering in our own head. So this is maybe I have cancer, or I have the thought of having cancer, and that's what's eating me away, because the pain in the moment really isn't that much pain. And if you look into it deeply, if you do enough meditation, pain is just as ephemeral as any other object that we have in our life. So the second noble truth is there is suffering. That's the first. And then we create our own suffering through our mental thoughts. The third is we can cease suffering. So it's actually possible to stop this process happening, to get liberated, I guess, if you want to call it in that way, from our own suffering. And this is by doing things such as meditation. This is by examining the core precepts of Buddhism, practicing in everyday life, etc., etc. That's the third noble truth. And then the fourth is the way that you can do this is the path. And so this is the Noble Eightfold Path. That's the way to cease suffering. With the Noble Eightfold Path, this is where it starts to get tricky. And I'll read it out how it's written in the book. So first we have right view, right thinking, right mindfulness, right speech, right action, right diligence, right concentration, and right livelihood. The tricky part is that there is these 8 connected rightnesses things. So it's really you trying to act in the world in the correct manner, in the right. I guess you could also say true is another adequate translation from this. And the problem with this is where it starts to get into the more subjective things. So the ordering of these, for example, which one do you start with? Well, you're sort of meant to start with all of them simultaneous, but also you need to focus on one. So this is where it's like, okay, do I believe this Buddhist person or this Buddhist person? So in this case, Thich Nhat Hanh has written it out in his view of the rough order that you should do it in. And there's also weird stuff where it's like, all of this is being translated from Sanskrit, obviously, which is where the Buddhism was originally written in, I guess, and communicated in. And so the words, and if you go online and look up, what's the Noble Eightfold Path, you will get different words. So for example, you can have understanding versus view. So right understanding versus right view. There's also this self-linkage within of, to have proper right understanding or right action, you need to have right view. And it's like this linkage goes out in each way. So you really need to focus all of on them simultaneously, understand all of them simultaneously, and put them into action simultaneously. Very complicated, and this is why I guess you can spend many, many years, decades, a lifetime studying Buddhism and still feel like there is more to be gained. This next part wasn't emphasized, but it was contained within the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, and I wanted to talk about it because for me it really emphasizes the, I suppose, core precepts, the core doctrines of what is in Buddhism and what they shouldn't do. So this is the 5 precepts or the 5 mindfulness trainings. It has 2 alternative versions of how you want to say that. So the first is no killing and no violence, essentially. The second is no theft, and this can be things like fraud or forgery. In the no killing section as well, this is where you will go to a Buddhist temple, for example, and you're not allowed to kill an ant or spray a fly or anything like that because they believe of the sanctity of life in all of its forms in the, I suppose, animal kingdom and animal realm. And this links to some other things related to karma and the rebirth cycle and all of that. The third is no adultery, which nowadays is more translated to no sexual misconduct. So being very, I suppose, aware of what you're doing sexually with other people, because that can get very, very messy. The fourth, no lying and gossip. That's relatively simple. And the fifth is no drugs or alcohol or really any type of intoxicant. So this is the 5 precepts that the Buddhist people should not be doing. The second part of the book goes into some of the more nuanced areas of Buddhism. So I've called this the heart, other basics, and discourses. Now, one thing you'll notice with here is there is a penchant for numbered list. And so I'm going to give a couple of the chapters that are contained within these sections. So we have the 2 truths, the 3 Dharma seals, the 3 doors of liberation, the 3 bodies of Buddha, the 3 jewels, the 4 immeasurable minds, the 5 aggregates, the 5 powers, the 6 paramites, the 7 factors of awakening, the 12 links of interdependent co-arising. There is many lists and many linkage things like this. So they really enjoy putting this sort of stuff down. We'll also find in this section the discourses. So these are direct teachings from the Buddha to his dikkus, or bhikkhus, I should say, which is, I believe, his disciples. I think that's the Sanskrit way of saying that. So these are things like the turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the Great 40, and right view. So these are real expounding from the Buddha of him talking directly to his disciples and saying, etc., etc. This is how this is done. This is why you should do this thing. This is why this monk failed in this respect and he, was suffering because of this. Also contained with this section are things that are typical in Buddhism, but not super clear. For example, in this, there are no super clear chapters of this is this part, but he will reference it within a paragraph or within a chapter and say, oh yeah, and this is also due to this thing. So some of these are dependent arising. So this is almost like everything that comes up in life, every action was dictated by the actions that came before that, which is a pretty core precept. Things like the 3 jewels. So this is almost how you should view prayer, and when you are struggling within your daily life, this is where you want to find refuge. So it'll be within the Buddha or his teachings or within your community, things like that. There is the liberation and nirvana. So we have all heard of this. This is almost finding enlightenment in a way. Karma, so this is looking more at the rebirth cycle and saying if you do bad things in this life, this will come back to haunt you in the next life, so don't do bad things, etc., etc. And not self and emptiness, and this is more linked to the meditation aspects of Buddhism. On to my personal observations and takeaways. You might have noticed in the theme section that I did a little bit different than I normally do, because I normally include my own thoughts on the theme that arises from the book, or how this relates to me in my everyday life, or a story that I found that highlights this aspect of it. However, this is done for a reason, because it's written in a very assertive way. I was sort of just repeating what was going on and what is believed in Buddhism. And that's because Thich Nhat Hanh in this book was very assertive. There was no modal adverbs, for example. There was no saying, this might be true, or this is probably this, or etc., etc. So those words of might, probably, they weren't there at all. All of it was written in a very assertive, this is the truth. And it doesn't necessarily say you have to believe this, but obviously if you're reading the book, well, it's sort of implied that this is exactly what Buddhism is. This is exactly what the Buddha said, and these are the truths of the world. So one of the things you'll notice while reading these types of books is there's not much of, I guess, guesswork involved. They are very committed and very sure of what they are saying. The problem with all this assertiveness is that there is no real logical understanding of where these come from. It almost feels like they're just random truths that are being spit out there. And so I really find it hard to say, like, okay, where did this actually come from? Are you just repeating this because the Buddha said it, 2,000 plus years ago? What is the understanding behind this? Where's the logical steps where I can look at this and go, yeah, that makes sense? What really drove this home for me was on page 76, and the, once again, penchant for numbered lists comes up. So within one page, people, you will find that there are 51 kinds of objects, that there are 7 factors of awakening. You'll find there are 5 kinds of meditation, and you will also find that there are 18 elements related to the different realms. All of this popped up within, 1 minute of reading a page. And so I just went, I understand none of this. Where did all of this come from? And how am I meant to, mentally put that in my formation of what Buddhism is and what you're trying to relate, which in this chapter was on right mindfulness. Like it just was overwhelming in a way of unhelpfulness. My final observations links to what I was talking about at the start, which is this pattern that seems to be recurring in many Buddhist books, and which is, I feel they're just written poorly. I just feel they're not written in a book format. So, for example, Thich Nhat Hanh on his Wikipedia page says that he has published more than 130 books. Now, this roughly equates to, let's just say, 2 books a year in his working lifetime of the 70 years that he's been alive, from 25 to 95. That's a lot of books per year, and it's really hard to say, like, okay, was this a really well thought out, structured book that he's put a lot of time and effort into to make clear, to try and get his point across? Or was this just taken from one of his many speeches, from one of his many sayings, and just, really just blurbed out there into a book format? I feel it's more that. So I've written down, what I have yet to find is a clear, non-translated, well-structured, visually aided basics of Buddhism. I've really yet to find one of those books. And, maybe this was a book that he spent a lot of time and energy and effort and all these things on, but, that's one of his 130 books. So is my chances of that really being the one? Probably not super good. So that's really what gets me about these Buddhism books. They're all just really couched in this confusing language. And I think the main problem with that, like the root cause, is the books aren't written with a lot of care, understanding, practice in English for an English reader. They're really translated, they're chucked out there, and it's like, here you go. You might get some understanding from this, but you'll probably have to read, 50 of these books to be able to piece together all of the interconnecting, weaving webs. And there's no like, hey, this is a simple explanation of the Four Noble Truths. There's a simple explanation of this. So that's just one thing I've noticed in the couple of Buddhist books that I've come across, the 5 to 10 that I've read in this last year. There's just been no clear, hey, this is it. So in summary, nothing really distinguishes this from any of the other Buddhist books I've read from another monk such as the Dalai Lama. I found it disordered, and to be honest, I just really struggled to get through it. It just was very verbose in parts. There was, yes, understandings and learnings and teachings from the Buddha, but it just not presented in a way that made it really stick in the mind and made it open and available to an English reader, I would say. So I struggle with that, and it does contain all the core info, I suppose, but honestly, I think you'd be better off just going to Wikipedia and reading the Wikipedia page, as it highlights it better and is written by a person who really knows their English and really is not having to filter through another language and things like that. So The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh, I'm being a little bit harsh, a 4 out of 10. I personally didn't enjoy it, but maybe some other people can get use from it. Oh, and that is it for today. Thank you, my mere mortalites, for joining me to this part of the video. What do you think of The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching? Was I being a bit too harsh? Have you read other Buddhist books and noticed a similar trend with regards to the translations and taking from the spoken word and put into the written word and having that little bit of disconnect? Am I going crazy here? Like, is this just me, or am I being too harsh and not appreciative of these books that are being put out? If you can do all of the nice things, like, subscribe, and comment, hit the bell, all of that helps me and helps the channel. And I really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Kyrin out.